We subsequently missed the Next Time concert, which was in San Antonio, Texas. So eventually, when Prince found out about that, he had already told us, in sort of my Prince voice, I told you guys not to produce any other acts. And you did, so you're fired. So we were all, and I'm telling you, in this room, it was Prince, Jesse, Morris, me, and Terry. There was only us in the room. So we're like, okay. So I got up right away and left. Terry argued with Prince for a little while. So what had happened, we had booked time at Larrabee's studio in LA to mix this SOS band song. So we walk into the studio, and in the studio is a guy named Steve Hodge. Now Steve Hodge, when you talk about engineers, Steve Hodge, okay, amazing. So, by the way, how do we know Steve Hodge? Because I read his name in the liner notes. I said, man, that's Steve Hodge. He mixes all the records we like. So when we do our mixes, we got to find Steve Hodge and we got to go to Larrabee Studios. And that's what we did. And we told him that. We said, hey, man, you don't know us, we don't know you, but we heard your work and you got to work with us, you know. So anyway, we do the record. It's a record called Just Be Good to Me. It ended up being our first #1 hit record. And our kind of career as engineers and producers were born. Now, when we did Just Be Good to Me, it was the first time, this was '83. This was the first time I'd ever seen, forget about a 24-track machine, now there's two 24-track machines that are linked together. It's like 48 tracks. Woo, man. We can stack vocals for days now. We can make a work tape and stack vocals. I know this is foreign to some of you, but okay, work tapes and analog and all that. But it was like a revelation. And it changed the way we created. It was like, oh man, we can just, it's not like we have to, now we would still bounce everything down, by the way. It's interesting nowadays, you could just make as many tracks as you want just endlessly, right? But I always liked the idea of bouncing it down. So like when we would get our little harmony blend and stuff, and we'd stack vocals like 4 times at least on each of the vocals, on each of the notes. But then we'd always bounce them down because there was something about the way that the vocal blend sounded if you did it in the moment that was better. And every time we didn't do that, we would be going back and trying to go, no, that first day we had it better, So you basically committed to it at that point, which I thought was always a great way of working. And we kind of try to do that now, and everybody goes, well, why do you want to do that? Everything it's all separate. And so I was like, nah, we like to do our little mix. But that was a revelation. And when I think about the technology that happened with keyboards, because I was a keyboard guy, and I remember doing an interview for Keyboard Magazine. Had chosen me for something. They liked something that I played, so they put me on the cover. And I said, you know what, I got to have my partner on the cover, even though he doesn't play keyboards, but we're a team. We got to be on the cover together. So they said, okay, yeah, that's fine, that's fine. So I remember in the interview we were talking about different kind of keyboards, and they said, wow, we really like. The interviewer was like, we really like the way your textures and your whatever, and you really like how you're doing that. And I was like, oh, that's cool. So what did you use to get the sound on, I don't know, Control, on the Janet Jackson Control album? What did you use? And I said, well, I said I used, there's a keyboard called a Mirage. And he looked at me like I'm crazy, a Mirage. Because Mirage was this little keyboard. It was a sampling keyboard, but the sample rate was horrible and the sound sounded horrible. It's like, well, wait a minute, how could you use that? I said, no, I don't know, I just plugged it in and I just used it. I mean, that was what sounded right to me in my mind. And the keyboards that existed were what I used. So then they said, but don't you go in and tweak the sounds, and don't you go in and do that? And I thought, no, I don't really do that, because don't they pay people to do that? Like at the factory when they make the keyboard? There's like experts. There's experts in there that are tweaking and we're going to get the best piano sound, and we're going to get the best Rhodes sound, we're going to get the best, and I'm like going, if I sit down at the keyboard and I'm pressing a preset that says piano, if it doesn't sound like a piano, I'm not getting the keyboard. Right? I mean, I'm not going to tweak, I can work on this and get this to sound. No, give me a keyboard that sounds like a piano. Or better yet, just give me a piano. That's all good too, So that was always kind of the theory I had. There's people in technology that are creating great things. Nobody was asking my opinion at that point on whether you liked the way this sounded or whatever. Now it's interesting because Ensoniq actually as a company, actually at that point in time did come to us and go, we're creating a new keyboard, would you guys, we'd love to send it to you before it comes out and you can tell us what you like, what you don't like, and whatever. And they actually sought our input. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it was a pretty significant thing to do that, to have companies do that. And I thought it was very smart on their part to do that because you know, the art of collaboration, obviously I'm part of a collaboration with my partner Terry Lewis for many years, and I just think there's such a value in that. So I love the fact that the tech company was, at that time, a keyboard manufacturer coming to us and saying that. And we had always kind of thought differently about keyboards anyway, because living in Minneapolis, it was kind of like, you know, once again, I'd look at the liner notes, and so there'd be like, somebody would say, oh, we played a Moog this synthesizer, or we played an ARP synthesizer, right? And I'm like going, Moog and ARP, I'm a little out of my price range. I can't do that. And plus, the early stuff looked like a telephone switchboard, right? There was like different stuff to plug in, and so I didn't know how to do any of that, you know. But luckily, companies like Roland came along and did presets and just said, here's a sound that sounds like a synthesizer. Okay, great, I'm with that. But the thing that really opened us up was, in Minneapolis in the early days, it was kind of like, we didn't know the right stuff to use, so we just used what was available. And for some reason, there was a company called Oberheim. And Oberheim had these synthesizers that, I remember when we went on the first time tour, they gave me this synthesizer that was huge. I mean, it was like, kind of like the podium tipped on its side, literally. And it had a bunch of knobs and stuff, but it had like 8 presets. And all I knew was, once you dialed in your stuff, you hit the preset button and there your sound was. And I remember we went on tour with Prince. And I remember we'd launch into Get It Up was one of our big records, or Cool was one of our big records. And our bass sound was killing Prince's bass sound, right? Because we had this big keyboard, right, that just was killing him. And so I remember walking on stage one night for sound check, and I got this little keyboard called an OBSX. And I said, what the heck is this? And they said, oh, we got rid of the old thing and this is the new thing. And I couldn't get that thing to sound like nothing. It was horrible. And I'm like going, wait, this is the same company that made that other thing? I said, oh, they should call me. Because I'm going to tell them, y'all blew it. Well, you got to make it sound like the other. Well, they didn't call me, but luckily about a year later, they came out with something called an OB8. Okay? And the OB8 had the sound like the old Oberheim thing, right? But being in Minneapolis, it wasn't that we were doing what everybody else was doing. We were thinking about it differently. So we used Oberheim synthesizers instead of ARP or Moog or, you know, whatever the popular one was. And our technological choices were always, I think, a little different looking back on it, because I remember we were into the Lindrum, which was pretty cool. I remember when everybody kind of got into like the SB1200 and some of these other drum machines and stuff, and we just were kind of like, no, we're cool with the Lindrum. We'll stick with that. That's kind of our signature sound. And then probably the biggest drum machine that for us was the 808, the Roland 808. Now the 808 is a drum machine that you've heard on every record. Matter of fact, for the young people, whenever you hear records now, because there's really not a lot of bass on records anymore, what there is now is kind of a drone at the bottom that kind of goes boom, 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 right? Anybody that's into hip hop, that's what it sounds like, right? Well, that drone at the bottom is an 808 kick drum. That's a kick drum from an 808 that gets tuned, right? And I remember we used the 808 and somebody said, man, it was so brilliant that you used the 808. And I said, well, we walked in the studio and we said, you got a drum machine? They said, yeah, what do you got? 808, okay, fine. That's what we used. So it's not, so once again, the technology drove the creativity. Because the beat for Just Be Good to Me and the beat for Tell Me If You Still Care and some of the old songs we did were driven because that was the drum machine was there, so that was the creativity that came out. So once again, tech and creative, intersected.